again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. You've been with us for a long time, many weeks. I think this is actually our 23rd webinar at this point. Given that each webinar runs slightly over an hour, you probably spent 24 physical hours or virtual hours with us. That's like a whole actual day of your life just spending time with us, and we really appreciate it. But the real key is to share with everyone else in this big community of food industry professionals. Please use that chat. You select the all panelists and attendees option. Let us know where you're coming in from. Let us know the delicious things that you're eating, and just say hi to all your friends and colleagues across the industry. Just as a little bit of a housekeeping, there is no webinar 2 weeks from today. Try as we might, we do not know how to update Zoom so it revises the calendar entry that sits in your calendar. So when we set up the webinar, Zoom probably sent you some sort of series of calendar invites. It scheduled it for every 2 weeks. We don't know how to remove the calendar invite for 2 weeks from today. So hopefully, just please know, do not come to this webinar on Thanksgiving Day. There will be no webinar on Thanksgiving. If you try to come in, you'll be hit with basically a blank screen or an error message, and it'll be very frustrating. So loud and clearly, no webinar on Thanksgiving. The next webinar is 2 weeks after that on December 10th. And just as another pre-warning, as it so happens, because this is every 2 weeks, 2 weeks after December 10th is what? Christmas Eve. We're not having a webinar on Christmas Eve either. As much as I love you, I feel like we should all just be spending time with our family or something instead. So no webinar on Thanksgiving Day, no webinar on Christmas Eve. The next webinar is December 10th. As a reminder, there is still a ton of new information being posted to the datassential.com/coronavirus page. All the latest stuff goes there. It's totally free to the industry. Use it, share it, and let's all recover better together. And just jump there and you'll get the latest. So I'm going to real quickly go over just some of the COVID stat stuff. There's really not much more to report here. So our latest wave of data came after the election, but before the Pfizer announcement. So use that as context for that November 6th date. After the election, at a time when there's probably still a little bit more uncertainty, but before the Pfizer announcement. And basically the numbers had not moved very much from the prior period. About 54%, a little bit more than half of people say, I'm really concerned about coronavirus. And if you look at the numbers for the percentage that say I'm definitely not eating out, still pretty much where we were previously, right? It moved from 43 to 44. That's within the margin of error. Not much move. So it will be interesting to see as we update this going forward if the promise of a vaccine or an impending vaccine is going to start moving us a certain way, or is the surge that we're seeing right now and some of the talk about how hospitals are maybe starting to get a little bit more overrun than they were a couple months ago, is that going to flip this in the opposite direction? We don't know, right? We can't forecast perfectly what the crystal ball is going to say and have it be perfectly accurate each time, but collectively as a group, we could probably use some common sense and just get some opinions out there. So I would like to ask all of you in chat, what do you think the next 3 months will look like for restaurants and businesses? Do you think the promise of a vaccine gets, things going strongly again for business? Or do you think that the surge in cases is going to move things in the opposite direction? Or does it net cancel things out? We started today by Kelley saying that there's no indoor dining in Chicago currently. Sounds like there's some other cities or states that are looking at doing the same type of a thing. But what do you think the next 3 months will look like? November, December, and January. Let us know what you think. Okay, so today's topic is going to be sort of an updated version of a talk we gave at IFMA's President's Conference, which if you're familiar with IFMA or not familiar with IFMA, they're a great organization for the food service manufacturer community. They put on really great events over the course of the year, and their President's Conference just happened, I think like a week or two ago, and it's a great event, and it's fantastic content. But we've been asked to sort of build a little bit on one of the things that we talked about over there, which are what are some of the things that are accelerated by COVID that we think will have real lasting strategic importance going forward. So not the of the moment, like, hey, what's tomorrow going to look like? but what is 2021, 2022, 2023? What are some of the things that are going to drive the future of eating and that have been accelerated by COVID in some way? So we're going to talk about three things today, and Kelley is with me. Kelley is a important part of our customer success team. She's also very charismatic, so she's going to jump in every now and then and add some color commentary as we go. And if I could ask Kelley for you to maybe monitor chat, if any interesting things come up, we can sort of stop and talk about that too. But the three major topics we're going to focus on today are: one, the thing that we call dual migration. I'll explain what that means in just a moment. Two, automation. And three, virtual brands. These are three things that we believe are accelerated by COVID that will become important, not just for the coming months, but will have ripple effects for years, potentially. And again, you know, if you have deeper thoughts about this, maybe you disagree with some of this, that's great. We should have that dialogue. So use chat to express your opinions.
Some people were guessing right, Jack. So there were a few people that guessed what you were going to talk about. So.
Oh.
Smarties.
That's almost like someone came from the future. So let's talk about this first thing that we call dual migration. What is it? What does that mean? Well, as the name would suggest, there are two aspects to this, and it really speaks to how people are going to be moving where they live from where they currently are to some new place instead. And we see this happening basically in two ways. The first is that people are going to be moving away from tier one cities, and I feel like maybe that's a misnomer. Like tier one, like implies that it's a better city. I'm not saying that. Tier one in this case means like the biggest, you know, cities, the most concentrated cities. So LA, New York, Chicago. People moving out of those, San Francisco, moving out of those types of places and into the next couple of tiers of cities, right? So I live here in Nashville, for instance, right? That would be like a tier two, tier three city versus like in LA or New York or Chicago. So we think that's happening. We'll show you some data on that. And secondly, it's people inside of a given city moving out of the downtown city center area and more into the perimeter of the city or into the suburbs. And this is going to have, we think, a pretty dramatic effect on the food system and more specifically on the restaurant industry. And we'll talk about why in just a moment. One way of thinking about this first is, let's look at how much it costs to buy a house. This is probably intuitive because we've all heard these stories, but it's also sort of crazy at the same time. The median home price in San Jose is almost $1.1 million. This, you're shaking your head, and I could not agree. That is crazy.
That is crazy. Median home price.
Right? That means half of the homes cost more than that.
Right.
San Francisco, $900K. In LA, almost $700,000. In Seattle, lower, but still pretty expensive. The median home is $460,000. Versus you go to places like where I live here in Nashville, you're in the 200s, Raleigh, 262, Houston, it's under 200. There is a big discrepancy in the cost of living and home ownership, right, depending on the city. And you can actually see an interesting chart over here. This is an inflow chart. We took this from the 2018 American Community Survey. And this says, of the current residents of a state, what percentage of them moved there within just the preceding year? So in California, about 1% of the people that live in California moved there in the prior year. In Idaho, it's like 5%, where you have a much greater influx of new residents into the state. And look at the ones that are sort of the right there: California, New York, Michigan, Illinois. You don't have a lot of new people coming into those states and cities, whereas Idaho, Wyoming, North Dakota, Alaska, Colorado, Nevada, you have much more of that activity happening. And you start seeing these headlines. I think we've probably all seen this, right? The great exodus out of California. Perhaps some of it's hyperbole, perhaps some of it's real, but these headlines precede COVID, but they've been accelerated further by COVID. More people are leaving California than coming in, and this is true of other states as well. And a company called Hire Helper, which is a moving company, they published some data. This is a partial list of states, so there's others that should be on here too, but we're just showing you enough that we could fit on the screen. of what moving trends look like. And this shows you net moves by state. So essentially, what's the ratio of people moving into a state versus the ratio of people moving out of a state? Sort of what does net migration look like? People moving out of those same places, New York, California, Illinois, DC, Minnesota too, interestingly enough. And boy, Idaho is rocking. I think isn't Boise supposed to be like one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing cities in America right now?
Yep.
I would like to do a plug for Idaho. If you've never been to Idaho or enjoyed some time there, it is awesome. I feel like it gets a bad rap. You say Idaho to someone, they think like potatoes, basically. There's a lot more. There's some beautiful mountains up there. It's great. So I'm glad to see more people are discovering Idaho. Although I do hear that a lot of Idahoans don't like all the Californians that are moving to Idaho because they're driving the cost of housing up. And sort of, you have this anti-California sentiment among some of the Idahoans now. So it's an interesting thing. But look at the types of places people are moving to and look at where they're moving away from. And our research here shows that 1 in 3 consumers right now across the country are considering moving. They're actively thinking about this, or at least giving some real thought to it. And if you look at the way these numbers break out by generation, it's most strong among Gen Zers, millennials, and Gen Xers to a slightly lesser degree. But the boomers are basically saying, yeah, I'm a little bit more good where I am. But those younger generations, and often those generations that have more varied food tastes, are the ones that are saying, I'm actually thinking of moving these days. And the question is why? So look at the top reasons that people say I would want to move. It's about having more space, or it's something that's going to be more affordable. And if you think about that, more space, more affordability, it directly lines up with moving away from those big tier 1 cities and moving more towards those tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So
well, and Jack, don't we typically see some of that as well, though, as people have children, they tend to move out to the suburbs as well. This just seems exacerbated by
it does. And we'll talk about that movement to the suburbs, but we're also seeing it among Gen Xers, and it's not just millennials, for instance, that are having kids.
Yep.
So movement from tier 1 to tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And then the second phenomenon is exactly what Kelley just mentioned, which is within a city, moving out from the center of the city to the suburbs or the perimeter of the city instead. And you start seeing these headlines now. You saw this pre-pandemic, and you're seeing it even more post-pandemic. Millennials are fleeing big cities for the suburbs, or in the midst of COVID, welcome to the hipsterbia era, where the suburbs are now becoming cool because all those cool people that were living downtown are now going to the suburbs instead and bringing all their coolness and their expectations of cool things to do and cool things to eat with them. Millennials on the move to the suburbs, the new downtown is often in suburbia. Again, COVID accelerating this. Look at a lot of those downtown areas. We talk about this. We look at our Firefly data, and we see that those really dense downtown areas where you have a lot of office buildings and stuff, those restaurants are closed largely. Much more closed than you find in other places. A lot of those amenities that you would want to live downtown for, just don't have access to those things. Those businesses are closed up, or you're not allowed to be around other people for some reason. So a lot of people say, hey, what's the point? Why pay this crazy high rent or whatever you're doing there? Why not go get a little bit more space out in the perimeter, right? So how is the pandemic persuading millennials to leave the city and make living in the suburbs cool again? So I'd actually like to ask all of you, so here's the question. If you could pick any type of area to live in, and you didn't have to worry about being close to work, let's just say anything you could, just whatever you feel would be the best type of place to live without having to worry about work or commuting or anything, what would be ideal in your mind? So this is interesting because I don't know, Kelley, can you see, you don't see the live tabulation when people are.
No, I can't see the live tab. No. Nope.
So what would you guess the distribution of these numbers would look like?
I'm going to say, I live in Chicago, so that's always a tough one, but I'm going to probably say suburban neighborhood.
So
for the majority of people. It's not my choice, but
votes. I'm going to cut it off. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We got tons of votes already. So let's share those results. So it's not downtown.
wow.
People don't want to live downtown, and you have almost a third of people saying, I want to be in that rural area. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm getting older, but I used to, like, when I grew up, I'm like, yeah, city is cool, rurally, like, that sort of sucks. But now I'm like, the rural area is actually sort of awesome in a way. I'd love to have all that space, never have to worry about traffic or anything. But this says something right here, right? It's not people want to live in these super crowded, dense places. And then it's, whether you want to be in perimeter, suburban, or rural, that's like 90%, at least of this audience.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive that it's split between kind of what people are looking for.
Yeah. So so that's what's happening. And we could actually take a look at our Firefly data. So as a reminder, Firefly is basically a census of every place that serves food in the country. It's what we call a universal operator database. Every single operator, restaurant, hotel, hospital, nursing home, corporate cafeteria, and also all the grocery stores and C-stores, everything's in there. And we can actually look at, let's say, just restaurants for a moment. And we can look at how different restaurant types, based on the cuisine they serve, are distributed across areas. So here's for the various cuisines, what percentage of that cuisine stores are in rural versus suburban versus urban areas. So you look at something like a buffet restaurant, pretty evenly distributed, right? You have a lot of its stores in rural places, you have a decent number of stores in urban places. But then you look further to the left, and a lot of cuisines are urban dominated, that you really only find them in urban areas. And to maybe put a finer point on this, so let's say we look at something like, this is blocking my screen, so I can't quite see. Let's say you look at burger restaurants as an example. So 35% of all burger restaurant locations are in urban areas, 38%, 39% in suburban areas, and 26% in rural areas. Pretty evenly distributed, right? Then you look at something like, let's go to the next one, barbecue, right? Also pretty evenly distributed, 30, 40, 29, right? Pretty evenly distributed. Or pizza, also pretty evenly distributed, 37, 38, 25, right? It's not like all of its stores are concentrated in just one place. So this is a nationwide statistic we're looking at. But then you look at something like Indian restaurant. I had Indian food yesterday. It was fantastic. That's probably the best thing I ate in the last 2 weeks, by the way. So my Indian meal yesterday. So if you want Indian food, it's pretty much heavily concentrated in urban environments. If you want, Vietnamese food, you're probably going to have to get it in an urban environment. If you want Middle Eastern food, you're probably going to have to get it in an urban environment. It's just not as available in other types of places. So the question is, all these people, all these really cool people that were living in top tier cities that have amazing diversity of both people and food choices, and living in those downtown areas where you have all this, like you just talked about that loyalist place. Yeah. I'm like, I don't have that in my neighborhood, right? I don't live in downtown Chicago. I can't get that. I can get less advanced offerings, within a driving distance of myself than you can.
But yeah, but the loyalist has a good burger, so you kind of get that across the way.
Yeah.
But when we were quarantining, we actually did that in a rural area. And the first thing that we did when we came back to the city was do Indian and sushi. It was like,
there you go. Right?
You just can't get those things there.
And that's the whole point, right? And so let's say you were quarantining in a suburb, it didn't make your craving go away. Right? So all these people that are moving from the downtown area that are used to these things and love these things, do you think that they're all of a sudden saying, yeah, I don't like that food anymore? Or are they going to bring their appetites and their cravings with them? Are they all of a sudden going to say, yeah, I used to like chicken tandoori, I don't like it anymore? I don't think so. Are they going to say, I love banh mi sandwiches, but now I changed my mind because, now I'm living over here instead. I used to love getting Persian food or this delicious cello kebab, but I don't want that anymore. That ain't going to happen.
Or try and figure out how to cook it at home, right? So
yeah,
they're
going to have a longing and a craving for this. And hey, it's a world of supply and demand. the demand will be there to have these types of foods and options outside of just tier 1 city centers. And there's going to be a big opportunity to spread innovation and more things that people haven't really tried yet en masse into these other areas where you didn't really have to do it in the past. We think innovation only moves in one direction. When you taste something new that you think is delicious or you really like, you've learned something. You can't really unlearn it, right? You're going to take that thing with you and it's going to spread. And these types of restaurants or these types of dishes will start appearing on suburban and rural menus and in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And this is a big opportunity for the industry, is to accelerate innovation in anticipation of all this movement and migration we'll see with consumers. So I'll ask you this. So, this might be very different if you're in a big city versus in a smaller town or something. But put this in chat and make sure you select all panelists and attendees so everyone can see this. What do you really crave, but you really can't get, not a really good version of it in your city or town? Like for me in Nashville is still a pretty big city. It's not tier 1, but I'd say probably tier 2 or something. I can't find good sushi out here. I keep fooling myself into believing that the next sushi place I go to is going to be amazing, but like half of them are also Thai restaurants. Some of them have like burgers on the menu. Just can't get it. I'm taking a trip to LA next week, largely to get sushi. It's gotten that bad. So I'm gonna put myself in harm's way to see if I can get more authentic sushi. So what are some things that you can't get where you live, but you're really, really craving? Okay, so many of you know that we have this thing called the menu adoption cycle, and there's 4 stages. Inception is that earliest stage where fine dining restaurants are doing it, then moves to the second stage, adoption, which is where fast casual restaurants and gastropubs and food trucks and higher end casual dining, or maybe it's something that's showing up in specialty supermarkets, for instance. And then you have the proliferation stage where more chains get on it. And then finally that trend moves into the ubiquity stage where it's sort of showing up everywhere. And you think about what this means for area types. And historically, if you think about that ubiquity and proliferation stage, those are the things that are much more common. Then you have those more interesting stages in adoption and inception, right? So, inception is that flavor or sauce that most people have never heard of before. And if you think about rural markets, whether it's a restaurant or a grocery store, the focus has historically been, and rightly so, on foods and flavors in the proliferation and ubiquity stages, right? That's what people expected. That's what they wanted over there. Suburban areas focus a little bit more on proliferation, like chain restaurant stuff, as well in casual dining in particular, as well as a little bit in adoption to make it a little bit more interesting. And then in urban environments, you see a lot of adoption-based stuff, and you see some inception really early stage, because if they don't show up in urban areas, they're not showing up anywhere at all, right? So that's sort of what it's looked like historically. We think with this dual migration thing that's happening, you're going to see something that looks a little bit more like this, where in rural areas, you actually want to go a little bit earlier stage and start focusing on some adoption foods and flavors as well. In suburban areas where we previously would have said, don't worry about the inception stuff. It's too crazy. It's too early. Don't worry about it. Now we think it actually sort of makes sense. And of course, in urban areas, you still want to focus on those first couple of stages too. So this is where we see at least the US shifting to, because the people are moving and taking their tastes and preferences with them. We think innovation moves only in one direction, and that one direction is, when I say one direction, I feel awkward. We had Justin Bieber, now we have One Direction. And that one direction is speeding up. So that's
Jack, I think you have everybody excited about this slide, because when you ask people what they're missing, it went off the charts for what people were telling us. So if we see this, and as we see this, people are really excited about this idea.
Yeah, I'm craving all sorts of stuff, right? We all are. I was in a panel presentation yesterday, and I went around the panel and I asked the people on the panel, when was the last time you hugged someone that wasn't in your immediate household? And everyone's answer was since February or March. That is crazy. But that is the norm right now. The same thing could be said about when was the last time you had something that you really craved, right? for many of us, it goes all the way back then. So that's the Datassential model of dual migration. We're actually preparing a white paper that talks about this in greater detail that we'll share out hopefully in the weeks ahead, that you can then share with your colleagues and peers. But we think this is going to be an important thing for the food industry. Okay, the second topic is automation. And you're seeing this everywhere, right? And we're talking about things that are accelerated by COVID. We think automation is really accelerated by COVID. I like robots. We've been talking about robots for a long time. The robots are going to be hitting us even faster than before, I think, because of COVID. And you start seeing headlines like this. There's a smoothie making robot at Walmart. Like signals the rise of the robot fast food worker. And if you're curious, it looks something like this. Basically just a robotic arm that, blends stuff and turns it and like pours your drink for you. It's probably not too different than like the robot bartenders you saw on cruise ships when we still had cruise ships. I guess that market dried up, so now I have to go to other places like a Walmart to get them installed instead. But there's much more than this, right? You've probably all seen like Sally, the salad robot from a company called Chowbotics. We featured them at our Foodscape event going back years now. They've had some pickup because a lot of places that used to do salad bars, like let's say as a grocery store, people don't want salad bars right now. Something that's more automated that feels a little bit safer and not being exposed to everything and other people are touching. That's sort of been a big boon to their business. And we're going to see a lot more of this, I think. Here's something called Flippy by a company called Miso Robotics, which flips burgers for you, but it also does other stuff too. So they've partnered with White Castle, and I think White Castle recently announced that they're going to expand their Flippy trial.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah,
Yep.
pretty cool. I mean, pretty cool, pretty intimidating at the same time. Pretty many different things. You can sort of see it in the back over there. And here it's not flipping robots, but in the a little bit closer to this, that arm is doing things like preparing fries and onion rings and whatnot. And you can sort of see how the system works over here. It's basically a robotic arm that's on a rail. I think it has like a vision system built into it. I don't know if the current iteration does this, but what I remember reading about early on is that there's like a vision system where it can detect how cooked the burger patty is on the grill, so it knows exactly the time to flip it. This probably does a lot of other things too, but this is starting to happen, right? The things that we were talking about a few years ago at Foodscape and saying this is going to be upon us, it is actually starting to happen, and it's happening in mass market applications too. But it's not just about robots, right? Think about all the ways that automation is impacting us and the food system. Contactless payments are a form of automation as well. Pre-pandemic, 32% of consumers had used, Apple Pay or Google Pay or NFC, tap your phone type of a thing. Just a couple months into the pandemic, that number went from 32% to 48%, and it continues to grow. So yeah, what used to require someone ringing up or interacting with the customer, now more of this can just be automated in some way.
It'd be great to see how much that's gone up since May.
Yeah, I would actually love to. I mean, we could probably remeasure it ourselves,
Yeah.
but there's probably some hard data from like the Contactless Payment Association. I'm sure there's an association for everything. We'll try to look that up. But even like kiosks, right? You don't really think about this. I was at a fast food place a few months ago, and they had kiosks there. I walk inside and I waited at the counter because I just sort of felt like ordering at the counter. And I waited there like 5 minutes until finally and no one had come up until someone finally came up and said, "Oh, we're kiosk only at this point. Please just order over there instead," which is totally fine. But a lot of the stuff that used to be human interaction is now automated, and we don't think of this as a robot, but it is automation doing something that a person used to do. And think of all the activity that's been amped up with people pre-ordering, ordering ahead on their device, right? Something that used to be a human interaction at the store is now a person's interaction with their phone or something, and they just go and they pick up their order. I think did I just see that Chipotle just announced some digital only store, for instance. I
Yep.
think that was in just like the last couple of days.
Yeah, it'll be here in Chicago.
Yeah, you know, there's got to be a good stat on this. What percentage of your life, Kelley, of your waking life, so not when you're sleeping, what percentage of your waking hours are sort of in some sort of a virtual world where you're on your device or you're looking at your computer, uh, something that involves a screen?
Almost, I would say probably 80% to
Yeah,
probably even 9. I mean, yeah, it's even reading a book, I use a Kindle. So I feel
yeah,
like everything is, unless I'm out for a walk or something along those lines. So
it's sort of
it's,
crazy, right?
yeah,
And like part of me says that's like sort of amazing. Part of me says like, oh, that's actually sort of scary too. So this is an interesting insight I had about myself the other day, and I wonder if this applies to anybody else. But you know, we love our dogs. We love our cats too. We had this talk last time about how we probably love our dogs more than our cats, but yeah, c'est la vie. We treat them all very well. So we're in the room with our dogs, and you know, we watch YouTube on the TV, just like the in TV app. And there's all these videos called like TV for dogs, which is basically just like a video that plays. That's not meant to be of like videos of dogs. It's a video that is meant to be for your dog to watch. It's like television for dogs. And they're like 10-hour long videos, right? Because you're supposed to like leave the house and just leave it on and your dogs can watch TV and they'll be entertained by the stuff that entertains a dog. And these videos are basically like, you know, like a deer standing in the woods for like an hour and doing almost nothing during that time. Then he goes like the next seeming thing that would seem to be really boring. So I put this thing on TV and our dogs actually do sort of stare at this a little bit. Then I sort of stared at it too. And then before I knew it, about an hour had gone by and I realized I just watched an hour of TV for dogs myself and was hypnotized by it. There is, I think, something about a screen that is just hypnotizing. I think about this too. Like, I would much rather look at a menu on a digital menu board than I
yeah.
would on a piece of paper for some reason. I don't know if it's like the light that comes out of the screen, but I spent a damn hour of my life watching TV for dogs, which did nothing for me, but I was entranced. So, yeah, I think you're right. Like 80%, 90% of our life probably involves a screen, and it's probably sort of sad. I don't know.
I'm a
So,
little concerned, Jack. We have to up your TV game.
yeah, I'm easily
Only when the
entertained.
dogs are gone. Only when or when you're gone. Only and the dogs are home. Can you put that on?
Well, they say 1 in 5 people can be hypnotized, which is how those hypnosis live shows work, right? They bring a bunch of people up and they start doing things. They can screen out the people that are not likely to be hypnotized, and they just leave the ones left that are likely to be able to. I guess I'm hypnotizable with TV for dogs, right? It just entranced me. I'm like, oh, there was an hour of my life. Goodbye.
Next
Um,
foodscape, we're having Jack hypnotized.
so, and you see, you know, to that point, this you never would have seen numbers like this before. A lot of people are saying, I'm willing to go out of my way and download an app to order an item that I can only get via that app if it was something that I wanted. Very true of Gen Z and millennials, not as true of boomers. Boomers really are the different generation when it comes to technology use. But you know, we're willing to do all these things that involve some sort of automation, or we're doing it ourselves from our device. And we even ask people this: how would you like to get menu suggestions? What would you prefer if you had to pick one or the other? Would you prefer to get many suggestions from a human being, like a server, or would you rather AI serve it up to you the same way AI serves up your Netflix recommendation or your, you know, Amazon product recommendation? A majority of Gen Z would rather get a menu suggestion from AI than from another human being. Think about that for a moment. We're so, you know, 80, 90% stuck in our screens and so used to what YouTube and Netflix and all these other things do that serve up ideas and suggestions for us, that the generation that grew up with that, a majority of them would prefer to get food ideas from an AI than from another human. Boomers say, no way, give me the human. But we have entire generations of people that say, I get it with the automation thing. I just accept this not only as something that is going to happen, but that I actually even prefer. So if you look at the things that people say they like about automation in food specifically, whether it's a restaurant or something else, you look at the top things are, you know, it saves time. I expect it to deliver better prices for me because there's more efficiency. in the system, or the service is going to be faster, right? There are some benefits, but it really comes down to the saving of time and money. It seemed to be more convenient and perhaps more affordable. Saves times, lower prices, shorter lines, faster service. There is a flip side though, right? So it's not all puppies and flowers. Is that an expression? How do you say it's not all roses? But puppies and flowers sounds pretty good, right?
I go with it.
Yeah, I think we just made something up. Okay, so it's not all puppies and flowers because there's some things that people are not so crazy about, but it's interesting. So what would you all think are the things that people would say, ooh, I don't know about that food automation thing. What would the big objection be, right? It's a social one. It's the objection of robots and other automation replacing humans and jobs that were done by people. 46% of consumers say this is a big concern for them. And if you look at the numbers and you break it out by generation, you start seeing something interesting. It's almost 60% among boomers, but only 1/3 of Gen Z and millennials. So yes, it's a concern, but it's going to become less and less and less of a concern as Gen Zs and the generation that follows Gen Z start to really mature and become a majority of consumer voice.
Well, it's interesting that the jobs that automation might replace might be the jobs that Gen Z would
Start
take
with.
on as some, right.
Yeah,
So
it's very,
I don't
it's
want to
very
do that.
true. Now, the idea is that more jobs will be created in new types of industries or fields. There's a lot of theory that there's going to be more of a need for sort of service-oriented jobs where the human being is providing some special sort of value, right? You know, relationship management type of things. But this is from I think this is a 2017 McKinsey study or report where they said that about 59% of business processes across all fields were subject to automation. Almost 60% of the things that we do in work are subject to automation, and that between 400 and 800 million jobs are potentially displaced. I think the other stat was something like 30 to 40% of the jobs that people do today in the US could be automated away in the not so distant future. Of course, other things will emerge, but that's a pretty big transformation of the workforce. And we thought automation was a big deal prior to COVID. We think COVID, for the reasons we just talked about and probably many more, are going to accelerate this further. So let's get ready for that environment. I'd be curious for you to say in chat though, like, what do you think are the types of tasks in food and restaurants that are most subject to automation? And what do you think are some of those things that are probably never going to be automated, or maybe, you know, the last things to be automated potentially? So with that, we'll go to our third major topic. And, you know, we all know that delivery has become big, and, you know, we sort of try to follow the money early on, years and years ago, before there was much of a conversation about delivery. You could see all the venture investment going into new delivery startups. And back then we said, you know what? They're basically starting to build the plumbing to make delivery a thing. And you can predict with a reasonable level of confidence that delivery is going to be one of the most important ways that the restaurant industry will grow. It's going to be a thing. We also said there's going to be a lot of things you have to look out for because it's not going to be done exactly right. But, you know, we featured this stat when we had Dana, who's part of our team here and actually joined us after having spent time at Grubhub and some other places in the space. We shared the stat that today, 70% of restaurants, we know this from our Firefly data set, 70% of restaurants in the US now offer delivery in some way, whether they're doing it themselves or working with one or more third-party marketplaces. This is a staggering number, I think, right? It was never like this before, you know. And if you just thought about your area near you, I said, hey, what percent of the restaurants near you deliver? I don't know. I figured like most people would say, you know, 20%, 30%. It's not. It's 70. The majority do it now. And whereas it used to be an urban phenomenon, now a majority of even rural restaurants deliver. And as Dana told us when she joined us, you know, the urban thing is how it sort of got started, because you didn't want the delivery driver to have to travel like super long distances to make that delivery. But now even in rural areas, over half of those restaurants deliver. So it's here very, very clearly. And the things that you're hearing more and more about in the world of restaurant delivery are ghost kitchens and virtual brands. I don't know, or I don't think that there has been a formalized definition of these terms yet, and sometimes they get interchanged or maybe conflated. I would like to propose that we cement those definitions right now. And our view of this is that a ghost kitchen is a little different than a virtual brand, and we'll talk about what that means in just a moment. A ghost kitchen, in our mind, is something like some sort of an incremental kitchen. Maybe it's a commissary, but it's basically a kitchen that's opened up for the express purpose of making delivery only food, right? There's no physical storefront. It's an incrementally additional kitchen, and one or more companies or brands can operate out of that kitchen and make stuff just for delivery. Companies like Kitchen United are setting up these sort of ghost kitchens across the country. In other countries, people are taking like old shipping containers and building them into incremental kitchens to just open up delivery only concepts. That in our mind is a ghost kitchen. And it's a little bit different than what we'd call a virtual brand, which is a separate but related phenomenon. So here is one example of perhaps what the future of restaurants and delivery looks like. And I'll let people in chat identify this person. And this is, this is from actually a few months ago, but maybe you read or experienced or even ordered yourself some of these Tiger Bites, which are like a special recipe for chicken nuggets, essentially. And the proposition is pretty simple, right? So Tiger Bites will reach out and appeal to restaurant owners and say, hey, you can now carry this product on your menu for free, and you basically have your own delivery only restaurant all of a sudden for free, where you could sell these Tiger Bites all of a sudden, right? It's not the restaurant coming up with the idea, it's the restaurant basically promoting a portion of what they do as a delivery only restaurant, offering up this branded product, which is made famous, by the celebrity and from all the marketing that goes along with it. Different type of a model, right? It's not the restaurant buying raw ingredients, making up their own dish, and then selling and promoting that dish. It's that restaurant being part of a network of Tiger Bites places and selling that product through. And it's really sort of an interesting change in models, right? You think about the traditional model, you have suppliers in the restaurants and food service selling their products to operators who then create dishes and then market and sell those dishes to consumers. Versus this sort of different type of a model where you have either a supplier or maybe a restaurant marketplace getting together to birth some sort of a new idea like Tiger Bites, marketing that to operators who then in turn move that to consumers. And in the traditional model, menu creation created with, sort of sat with the operator, right? The supplier didn't create the menu, the operator created the menu. In this type of an approach, the menu creation actually happens pre-operator in some way. So we don't think this will be a majority of food that we get from restaurants, but it's an interesting new type of a business model that's been made possible by delivery and also because of COVID, because delivery has been accelerated in such a way. And think about what this means if, let's say, you're a food manufacturer. You can now directly influence the menu in a way that goes beyond just, suggesting an idea to your operator or your operator partners that they may or may not take. You can now build a direct relationship with the consumer in some way. And you may be able to build an actual brand with the consumer as well via a product like that. So again, we don't think this is going to be a majority of the market. We do think you can probably see more things like this, however, and it's probably an opportunity worth at least thinking about. I think most of us have heard about the success of Brinker's Just Wings concept. I think they were doing something like $3 million a week off, and perhaps more than that now. I'm not sure what the latest figures are, off of their virtual brand. And it's been a phenomenal success, and the product is prepared in and then delivered from typically a Chili's. But to most consumers, they may not necessarily know that. Now, I will say Brinker does a good job of actually notating this in the apps that I've seen, where it says this is a concept from Brinker, and they don't. It's not really something that's like hidden. But I'll show you something else that's really sort of interesting, which is that platforms like Uber Eats are really trying to get behind this virtual restaurant idea. So the idea that you could have an existing restaurant, let's say, have more than one brand, right, listed online. So you were this restaurant and you'll still be that restaurant online, but on top of it, you could have this other restaurant that consumers see too, operating out of your existing kitchen with maybe a slightly different menu, or a totally different menu, or a slightly modified menu with a whole new name instead. So those third-party marketplaces are getting behind this push, and you have companies like Virturon, sort of a startup, trying to help restaurants get into this virtual restaurant, virtual brand space as well. And I would ask, before we go much further, in chat, I would actually love to hear your thoughts, because again, we cannot crystal ball this with perfect accuracy. We have our opinions here based on the data that we have. But as industry experts, do you think that these type of virtual brands are the wave of the future, or are they not? And why or why not? We would love your opinions if you're so inclined to share them in chat. Are virtual brands basically a restaurant that already exists, opening up another brand from that same restaurant or kitchen? Is that going to be some sort of wave of the future, or is this a flash in the pan thing that's going to peter out? And why or why not? Now, I will say that there are a lot of benefits to this. If you're an operator, especially if you're an operator that has less than 100% utilization of your kitchen right now because of COVID, there's minimal startup cost. It costs a lot of money to open a physical restaurant. It costs very, very little to start a virtual brand, right? It's almost all incremental revenue. You're not cannibalizing your other business. You're basically competing with all the other restaurants around you. So it's truly incremental to what your existing brand would have pulled in. You can improve your labor utilization if you have excess labor or excess kitchen capacity. You can de-risk your operating cost, and you can maybe build excitement around a brand new brand in some way. I actually wouldn't be surprised if we see the rise of like the limited time restaurant, not just limited time dish or limited time offer, but restaurants just pop up for a limited time, and that becomes actually part of their appeal because they become virtual brand of some sort. There is another aspect though, which I think is really, yeah.
I'm going to throw in something there, because we, in Chicago and Seattle and probably some other northern cities, where we have restaurants that are talking about hibernating for the winter. So there's going to be an empty kitchen already. So why not utilize a situation like this, at least during COVID and during hibernation for restaurants?
So they hibernate and then they do something else during hibernation under a different name, essentially. Yeah. I almost think, why wouldn't you?
Right.
Just why you've done the hard part of building that kitchen and building that space out and getting your staff trained and everything. Why wouldn't you take advantage of
exactly
this? So there is I don't know if I'd call this a flip side, or there's another aspect of this which I think is interesting, which is things might be about to get like super confusing. So I'll give you an example. So I log into, I think this is DoorDash. Yeah, this is DoorDash, Dash Pass, you can see it. So as a DoorDash user, and I use all the different delivery services, as most of you probably do as well, log in and I see, oh, hey, here's a cool place near you called the United Pepperonis of Pizza. I'm like, whoa, that sounds like that's probably like a really cool, new, hip pizza place started by, a chef that probably has a tattoo or something, and it makes like some amazing type of pizza, and it's meant for like a, cool young audience. So here's the United Pepperonis of Pizza on DoorDash. Here's United Pepperonis of Pizza. So this is the Nashville area. Here's United Pepperonis of Pizza, also listed on Seamless in Nashville. And here's the United Pepperonis of Pizza, also listed in the Nashville area, but this time on Postmates. I'm like, oh yeah, United Pepperonis of Pizza, this is like a thing. And the listing on Seamless and Postmates they actually list the address of the place, right? The physical address. You can see one of them is on 22nd Avenue North, and the one on Postmates is actually a different location at 2614 Lebanon Pike. So I said, okay. And because we live in the age of Google, you could actually just Google these addresses as well. So I said, let's Google the address, these two addresses for the United Pepperonis of Pizza, right? So when you Google these addresses, 205 22nd Avenue North, you get this in Google. Michelangelo's Pizza, Nashville, Midtown, 205 22nd Avenue North. What are the odds that there is another pizza restaurant at that exact same address? You know, maybe it's a strip mall or something, and like they're just right next door to each other and they have the same address. Technically possible, I guess. How about 2614 Lebanon Pike? Oh, it's a restaurant called Sicilian Pizza. Again, what are the odds that there's another pizza restaurant that has the exact same address as this United Pepperonis of pizza places? Well, the odds are probably pretty low. And you know, United Pepperonis of Pizza is a virtual brand that is actually these other restaurants instead. So I guess as a consumer, I might feel a little bit confused about this because I came into this proposition saying, wow, there's a cool new restaurant. Like, you know, in Yelp, they have like that search filter for hot and new. Like this sort of feels hot and new, like, look at this place. I've never heard of this before. I want to give it a try. But it's actually these other restaurants already. So I don't know. I mean, Kelley, do you have like a reaction to this? Would you care or?
I don't care. Is the pizza good?
Well, so that the question then is the pizza good? And you then have to maybe look at the reviews for the existing restaurant, right? But is there part of you that, you know, thinks this might be confusing or that
Yeah,
maybe even
it's a bit
some way?
confusing. I feel like in Chicago, there's so much of this going on that it's not new.
Yeah.
So I guess it's whether you just, it's expected, especially now.
It is, but you know, the question is, what is the purpose of a brand in the first place if the brand is supposed to stand for something? And if the brand is actually something else, I'm not quite sure. So we asked consumers about this, and 2/3 say that those third-party marketplaces should be required to both label, you know, identify which brands are virtual brands, as well as name the actual restaurant, the actual original restaurant that that brand is operating out of. Another 20% or so say just identify the virtual brand, that it's a virtual brand. You don't have to tell me the other restaurant, the original restaurant, but at least let me know. And then you have only a minority, about 14%, saying I don't need labeling at all. But 86%, right, say that I want this to be identified to me in some way. So we do think that virtual brands are going to be a really big, important thing. It's a huge, huge opportunity because, again, why wouldn't you do it as an operator? But there will probably be some point where consumers will say, I just need a little more transparency with all this as well. So that's it. We are finishing on time today. I want to thank all of you and thank Kelley as well. And we finished on time, ahead of time, specifically so I could remind us one more time, do not join us in 2 weeks. Despite what your calendar says, there is no webinar on Thanksgiving Day. We'll be back on December 10th, and then we're going to skip Christmas Eve, and then we'll be back every 2 weeks after that, going into the new year. Thank you all again. You've always been fantastic. It's great to hear all the comments and sharing throughout the food community and you know, all of our friends across the food industry. If you need us for anything, we're here for you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.